Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today at Trinity College, Cambridge. My name's Glenn Rangwala. I teach politics and international relations here at the University of Cambridge, but I'm also the admissions tutor at Trinity College, so I oversee the admissions process that goes on for every year for our whole new range of students who come to this college. I'm joined by Davidzo.
Hello, I'm Davidzo. I've just finished my second year studying psychological and behavioural sciences here at Trinity, and I'll be here to answer any questions.
So we're going to encourage you to send us any questions you've got about coming to Cambridge, about the degree programs that you're thinking of applying to, about more generally about what it's like, life is like as a university student. Feel free to send us those questions. We'd like you to use the Q&A box, which you should see on your screens. There should be a Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom session. And could you use that rather than the chat box to send us questions? So we're looking in one place to see the questions that you're sending us. And the idea is that we'll try and address as many of your questions as possible over the space of the next hour. But first, let's just say a few words about what this session is for. We're still just over 3 months away from the application deadline if you're thinking of joining us in 2026. If you want to apply to the University of Cambridge, you have to apply by the 15th of October. And so my sense is that most people at this stage, you finished year 12, you've got a good idea of the sort of subject you'd like to apply to at university. But many of you will still be thinking about, is Cambridge the right place for me? How do I go about it exactly? Maybe which of these two possible programs that look good to me would be the best for me? And then also maybe thinking a bit further on about, do I apply to a college, and if so, which one? What makes a good application? How do I make my application competitive? So those are some of the themes we're going to address over the course of the next few minutes. Davidzo, could cast your mind back 3 years? What stage were you at in thinking about your application in July 2022?
Yeah, so I think at this point last year, I was very much just in the early stages of deciding that Cambridge was the place for me. I think what drew me the most specifically to Cambridge was the way that the psychology course is structured here. And I think it's the same for a lot of subjects here where you get the option to do some optional modules on top of your mandatory papers. And for me, I did English and maths at A-level, so you could say my interests kind of spread very widely in that regard. Having the option to kind of read beyond psychology while still having that foundational knowledge, that was really important to me. And I liked that the course facilitated that. So I think that's what really drew me to Cambridge.
So Cambridge has 30 different degree programs. And generally, we have quite broad first years in Cambridge. We do a lot of different courses with you in the first year. That gives you the groundwork for thinking productively about which direction you want to go in your second and third year. And most degree programs, it's not this case with everyone, but most degree programs start giving you a significant degree of choice from your second year onwards. So once you've got the building blocks in place, then it's moving on to the second and third year in a way that enables you to understand the breadth of the subject, the different things that go on in it, but more particularly what you'd like to be doing within that subject as you develop through the degree program. Some of the titles are not immediately obvious what they cover. So one of the degree programs I teach for is Human, Social and Political Sciences, and that requires you to read a bit more about what it covers in order to get a sense that it's the degree program for you. Other programs like Natural Sciences is one of the largest degree programs in Cambridge, covering all the main empirical sciences. And other programs like Land Economy, again, you may need to look a bit more about what they cover and think about whether it's the right degree program for you if you're thinking about something within that broad field. I'm hoping that most people who are joining us here today have done a bit of that and have been thinking about which programs they're going to be thinking of potentially applying for. But please feel free to send questions in the chat box. In the Q&A box, if you do want to ask specific questions about individual degree programs. Alternatively, please do feel free to email us. In the chat box, we've put our address, the admissions@trin.cam.ac.uk address. And if you've got individual questions you'd like us to answer that are particular to you, then please feel free to email us rather than use the Q&A in this session. So, and please feel free to ask anything. No question is too basic. We don't keep records of who asks which question. So you can feel free to ask us anything you like over the course of the next hour. One of the things that once you've chosen a subject will come to your attention is that Cambridge asks you also if you wish to apply to a particular college in Cambridge. And there's 31 colleges in Cambridge, of which 28 admit undergraduate students. And what I'd just like to do is say a bit about this college, the college that I'm at, Trinity College, and the visitors at Trinity College, as well over the course of this time. It's not compulsory to apply to a college. You can put in a so-called open application, which just leads to your application being randomly assigned to a particular college. But the college choice is one that I think matters to many people. It's one that gives you a sense of what life would be like as a student if you were to come here, what the assessment will be like when you're applying. And although it's not as important as choosing which university or which course, it is something I'd like to say a bit more about. The college is the place which is your base, your home base within Cambridge. It's the place most students live. It's the place they often have their meals. It's the place that does the small group teaching with them, the so-called supervisions that we have with students. And it's also the college that provides you with the person who acts as your overall mentor, your director of studies, as well as provides pastoral support. And we'll say a bit more about all of that in a few moments. The university is the one that organises the actual course itself, sets the syllabus for the course, that does the lectures, that does the exams at the end of the year with you. So that's the central university. And that's the same whichever college you're at. So the college, in some sense, acts as one of the building blocks for your time in Cambridge, one of the places where you'll spend a lot of time and meet lots of people, but won't necessarily be sort of the place that ends up doing most of the teaching, which is done at the lecturing level. So just to say a bit about this college, Trinity. Diviso, did you remember your first visit to this place? When did you first come here?
I believe my first visit to Trinity was actually an open day, which was an amazing chance to get to see the college, to meet some students, ask any burning questions I had, and just kind of situate myself in Trinity and see, is this the place for me? Is this where I see myself living for the next 3 years? And that did confirm my decision in my case. So yeah.
Yeah. So Trinity's a lot of different things. I mean, it's a magnificent set of buildings and grounds. There's lovely gardens all around the college. There's lots of free space for students to use, to work in. There's a big library, all of that sort of type of stuff. There's the physical infrastructure of the place. Then there's the history of the place. This is a college which over the last 479 years has been the base of many of the world's leading scientists and mathematicians, poets and philosophers, and politicians over the past 5 centuries. But what matters to us most is how Trinity also means the group of students who are here. We admit 200 new undergraduates every year. It's the largest number of any college in Cambridge. We admit students across a wide range of subjects. We try to have an equal balance between arts and humanities students and maths and sciences students. We take in students who generally are very academically interested, engaged, excited by their subject. And that's what, in some ways, keeps them together as a group, that they have their subject interests, which are very strong. Because there are a very wide diversity of different people, different backgrounds, different nationalities, different interests otherwise. And that's a really exciting part about Trinity, that you meet people all the time with very different backgrounds, very different interests to yourself. They're academically engaging, and they can generally give you a good sense of why they're interested in what they're interested in. But it's always an exciting place to meet people. And so I always say that Trinity is a good place for curious minds. It's a good place to meet people who you think will be interesting and contribute to your way of thinking about the world around you. So it's a great place for the curious. It's also got a great set of teaching staff. So we have lecturers who act as the directors of studies and supervisors for our students here at Trinity, in all fields of study, devoted to educating people in their subject to the highest extent, fostering the interest of a new generation of students. And we think that's one of the real strengths of the college, that we've got leading academics who want to take a role in educating the next generation of students. David, you must have a director of studies and who you speak to occasionally?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So my director of studies and my tutors have been some of the greatest amount of both pastoral support and academic support that I have available at Trinity and just in the wider university. So my tutor, for example, I'll go to him if I have financial issues or if I have any difficulties from a pastoral aspect, whereas my DOS is very much there to support me academically. You know, if I'm worried about something, I can go to him and he can go, well, we can see if we can arrange for you to have another supervision, or maybe we can give you some resources to help you out there. They're both kind of there at my disposal in a way. They're there when I need them. And I really do appreciate having that. Yeah.
We're really keen to treat our students well while they're here. And so one thing we have for all our students is accommodation on site. We have generally quite high quality accommodation. Both the older and the newer parts of the college have student rooms where they live. And again, do you have nice accommodation?
Absolutely. So at the moment, I'm living in Hewells Court, which is one of the oldest sorts of accommodation styles, but it's an absolutely lovely room. I'm very lucky to have a set. So I have sort of like a living room and then my own bedroom and then a mini gyp, so sort of like a kitchenette room in a way. And I love it. It's the perfect place to have friends over. I love the separation between my two rooms. It feels very much like I'm living in like a proper apartment, like it's proper living. No, I love it so much. And just the history steeped within the court itself. I think it's a really cool anecdote to tell the people who step into my room. Really love it.
Great. Okay, so we've warmed you up, I hope, given you a bit of a sense of the college. I hope, of course, that many of you who are interested in applying here can visit in person, but if you can't, I hope we've given you a bit of a sense of what it's like. The website, of course, of the college also has lots of further information for you. But since the questions are now coming in, I thought we'd start addressing a few of the questions that you've got. We can talk about the admissions process, but I think that may be best led by you asking questions about it rather than me taking you through it in a sort of step-by-step way, which you'll find anyway on the website. So I wonder if we just want to start with the question about how we choose people through the process. The first question is about choosing people for interview. And just to lay it out in a series of steps, students who are applying for entry for the next year or deferred entry for the following year apply by the 15th of October. We then look at the range of different material that you've supplied to us as part of the application. In many subjects, that also involves the so-called pre-interview assessment that students take. So in most of the sciences, except for PBS and maths, and then in the arts and humanities for law and economics, we ask you to take a separate written test. It's not a pass-fail test, but we do take that as an important part of our assessment of your application. And here's the bit to remember. You have to often register for that test in September before you actually put your application into the college. So we don't actually know who you are when you're putting that application in to take the test. You haven't applied to us at that stage. We can't send you a reminder to register for the test. But please, if you're in one of the subjects that requires you to register for a pre-interview assessment, please do so. Generally, the deadline is between the 15th of September and the 29th of September, depending upon your subject, for registering for that test. And I'm sorry to say, if you don't register for the test, it's very difficult then to move your application to the next stage. We get the applications in, we look at all the things that you've done, we look at your past results, we look at your exam predictions, we look at your personal statement, we look at your reference, we look at additional material you send in, such as a school transcript. We ask certain students to send in school transcripts. We look at the results of a pre-interview assessment if it's relevant. We ask students in many arts and humanities subjects also to send in written work from school, so to send in an essay, for instance, that they've written at school. And all of that's important. We look at the whole range of different things you send in, the additional information that comes in about you from your school, as well as the information that you send in, as part of our process of whether to take you to the next stage of the process, which is the interview stage, which happens in December. So there's a whole set of things that happen between you formally applying and us making that decision that involve us reviewing the whole sets of information available to us. Somebody's asked if there are quotas per subject, and there are no quotas per subject. It all depends upon whether we think you are an applicant who has the relevant potential to go on to do well here at Cambridge. So we're looking at about a whole range of different things and thinking about whether it's plausible to think about you as being offered a place here. Generally, we interview the majority of students in any one subject who apply to us. So in a subject like my subject, human, social and political sciences, we get in around 60 applicants a year, of whom we interview about 35 to 40 a year. PBS, we get in about 50 applicants again, and we interview about 30 of those students as well. So it's not automatic that everybody who applies gets an interview, but we do look to see if you are the sort of student who will go on to be going on to get the minimum level of grades that we require, A star, A star, A at A level in the sciences and economics, A star, AA in most of the other arts and humanities subjects. We're looking to see if it's the degree program that you've explained in your personal statement is relevant to you and your interests. We're looking to see if your school tells us information about you that gives us confidence that you'll go on to be a good student here at the University of Cambridge. So all of that's relevant in making an assessment about whether to call you for interview. If you're taking a pre-interview assessment, then that's also an important part of the process of making a decision. Not decisive, but it's an important part of making a decision about whether to call you for interview. If you are called for interview, that's December, and I'm sure we'll have other questions about that coming up. But to answer the question about whether we have a quota for interviews, the answer is no. We do look at every application individually, and we make a decision about whether or not it's reasonable to think about you being made an offer to study here at this university. Okay, let's move to the second question. So this is specific to the natural sciences, and it's asking about whether there are additional tests at Trinity compared to other colleges. So let me just take that one. So all students applying to natural sciences take the same test, whichever college they've applied to. That's called the ESAT in October, the Engineering and Sciences Admissions Test. All students applying to any college take the same test. At Trinity, before your interview, for most of our science subjects, we give you something to do before the interview actually begins. So you're not just walking into an interview without any prior thought about the sorts of questions you're going to see. What we do for maths and engineering and natural sciences, as well as a range of other subjects, is we give you something to look at before the interview actually begins. It's not a test in the same way as the ESAT. It's a set of questions for you to think about before you begin. So, you get half an hour or an hour to look through this set of questions before you begin the interview. You get to write down some notes. You get down to get to think about different ways of tackling the question. And then you come into the interview having thought about those questions and explain to your interviewers how you tackled the question and how far you got with the question in thinking it through. It's not a test because there's no mark associated with it. You don't get a mark out of 10 or whatever for doing that test. But it is a way to give you something to do before the interview actually begins, which you can then sort of think a bit about for yourself. You can write out a few notes for yourself if that's helpful, and then explain how you would engage with that to your interviewers. So that's a bit different from some other colleges. A lot of colleges do similar things, but that's one thing that we devise for Trinity applicants, to give ourselves a sense of how students would think through complex problems. And the problems are complex. I mean, nobody gets them all right. It's not like a right or wrong thing anyway. Often these are problems that don't have an immediate answer, but we want you to think through the complexity and how far you can get. And the interview is often a discussion about sort of how you develop your thinking with additional information that's provided to you by your interviewer. So it's often sort of giving you further ideas, giving you further guidance on how to go about thinking about that problem, which then we want to hear how you develop over the course of that discussion in the interview. We've got a question, do places in a certain course fluctuate between years? And the answer, I can answer that one again.
No,
We'll get, if you've got questions about student life, please do feel free to ask them, and I'll come those over to Davidza. But on places per subject per year, the answer is very much yes. We do make a decision largely on the basis of the strength of the field of applicants that we get and that we see across the university more generally. Numbers, especially in smaller subjects, go up and down a lot from year to year. And we don't want to fix a certain number and say we'll take 3 or 5 or 10 students in that subject. And we don't know how many good applicants there will be, applicants with good qualifications and high potential applying for that subject. And so the numbers vary a lot in subjects from year to year. The only subject where there's a fixed number is medicine, where we do have, just because of resources and facilities in the university, we can only take a certain number of students in medicine per year. And so we take 12 students per year in medicine. For no other subject is there a fixed number, and it does vary enormously from year to year as a result. We've got a question about grade expectations. And generally this is a bit of a difficult one because there are differences for different subjects, and there are differences by college as well sometimes. And this is one of those slight complications of the Cambridge system. And so it's definitely worth looking at the websites of different colleges to see what they say about individual subjects. However, there is a standard expectation, which is basically in the arts and humanities, it's except for economics, it's A star AA at A level. So 1 A star and 2 A's is the minimum requirement. And in the sciences and in economics, it's 2 A stars and an A at A level. And so if a college doesn't specify anything, then it means it just gives the standard offer. A lot of colleges, including Trinity, always list the offers specifically, but if a college doesn't list them specifically, then it just means they give the standard offer for that subject as their general offer standard. And so you need to think about whether that's a reasonable level for you to be attaining, whether that's the sort of thing that your school will be able to provide sufficient confidence that you'll be able to get those sorts of grades if you're thinking of applying here to this university. We've got a question about the interviews as part of the broader application. And I suppose the point generally is that we look at the whole range of information you supply to us as part of the application. I'd further say to the Davidza, in your application, what sorts of things do you think were most relevant for your application?
I think my interview is probably the most relevant aspect, only because I didn't have to provide any pre-interview work or do any pre-interview assessments. So it did feel like my teacher referenced my personal statement, but neither of which were kind of referenced in my interview. So the interview itself, which was very much academic based, formed the bulk of kind of how they saw me, whether they saw me as a suitable candidate. And that interview kind of pulled upon various different skills. It wasn't necessarily one fits all, but I think what surprised me the most is how much of a relaxed conversation the interview felt like. I think people come in with lots of preconceptions about what their interview is going to be like, maybe a little bit scared, a bit anxious, but it did just feel like a very enjoyable conversation with two extremely renowned academics in the field of psychology, and I just felt very grateful to even be there and having that conversation. So for me, it was a very enjoyable experience. I think a lot of people shouldn't be too worried about their interview. It was enjoyable for me.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose what we're always trying to do is look for what gives us confidence in your application as a whole, that you would be a strong student here over the course of your time here, that you'd go on to enjoy the course, get something out of the teaching, and learn through the degree programme. And sometimes you get that more through the reference and the other information we know about a student. In some cases, it is a bit more about the interview, where the student shows themselves able to pick up on points very quickly and develop their thinking in conversation with an interviewer. And sometimes it's more just sort of the way in which they've developed at school and the sense that comes through their grades that they've got at school that gives us confidence. So what we're doing is looking for the strength in your application. And sometimes that's the interview, sometimes it's something else. But sometimes, it's quite common to have an applicant who's got a very strong academic track record, who's got a stellar teacher reference from their school, which shows us that they're one of the strongest students in their school in that subject, who doesn't give necessarily the best interview, but we still make them an offer. There's enough material there to give us confidence that they do well at interview. So it isn't the case that it's sort of, it's the only thing you've got to do well in your application. And of course, you've got to get the grades at the end of the day. So we always make conditional offers to those students who are still at school. And, however good your interview, if we give you an offer and you don't make that offer, then there's a fairly good chance that we won't take you unless it's a very narrow miss in your final grade. So, you've got to get those 2 A stars and an A at the end of the day in a science subject, or A star AA in an arts and humanities subject. So there isn't a single point of success or failure in this respect. There are many different ways to succeed as part of an application. Just in terms of numbers, I think this answers one of the questions that's just come in about the probability of being offered a place from the pool. One nice thing about this college is that we get a very large number of our applicants being made offers by other colleges. I think generally, it's not always the case in every subject, but generally we get a very strong field at Trinity of our applicants. And so every year we make about 260 offers, and we get another 100 of our applicants made an offer by another college in the pool on average. So in total, about 360 of our applicants get an offer either from us or from another college. And that's that is usually the largest number of applicants at any college who get a pooled offer from another college. And I think that just reflects the way in which many colleges see the applicants at Trinity as being a strong field. And if we're pooling them, then I think there's a decent chance of them being made an offer by another college. In total, I mean, it is a competitive process. There's no getting away from that. We get about 1,600 applicants per year. But out of our home applicants, out of the students who are from the UK, the average over the last 3 years is that 26% of our applicants get an offer either from Trinity or from another college. So it's around 1 in 4 of our applicants of our home applicants get an offer. And I think that does reflect in some ways the strength of the field overall, that we are getting strong applicants across most subjects. And it also reflects something about the way in which the Cambridge system isn't quite so intimidating in terms of the numbers being taken, being made an offer, as it might otherwise look. So, you might see Trinity gets 1,600 applicants, but only has 200 places, and that's 1 in 8. Well, it's not like that, partly because there are more candidates being made offers than actually taking their places here. And also, there are ways in which many other candidates get taken in the pool by other colleges. So overall, it's not quite as intimidating a set of numbers as it might look, though of course it is a competitive process. Okay, we've got a question about the number of interviews that you'll have. Do I remember, did it say that you had only had 1 interview?
Yeah, I only had 1 interview. That was sort of the standard at Trinity for PBS in my year.
Yeah. So in any one subject, all the students who are invited to interview will have the same number of interviews. You don't have a situation where some students in a single subject have 2 interviews and some have 1. But generally, just depending upon what the preferences of the interviewers, often some subjects do 1 long interview and some subjects do 2 short interviews. And that's just really down to the individual preferences. Don't read anything into it. So, for instance, maths do 1 long interview with the students because they feel that works better in developing a conversation with the student over a range of different problems over the space of about 40 minutes or so, which is the length of the interview, the single interview. A lot of subjects do 2 short 20-minute interviews where you're talking about different sorts of things. So 1 interview will be based around something you've been asked to read in advance. So in my subject, human, social and political sciences, we give students something to read, and 1 interview is based around that. And then another interview is based around, say, the personal statements and the essays that you sent in as part. And so both are about 20 minutes each. It could be 1 long interview, but we tend to prefer to do 2 short interviews to give you a bit of a break in between. So there's nothing really that sort of from your side that makes a difference there, whether it's 2 short interviews or 1 long interview. If it's 2 interviews, they'll both be on the same day. and usually sort of in an hour's break in between the two interviews. And we also encourage our UK and as many of our overseas students to come in person for their interviews if they can. So we like to sort of sit down with you and do a sort of teaching session almost like with you in the interview. We always model our interviews on what it's like to be supervising a student and give you something to think about and see how you respond to it. And so whether that's done in 2 short batches or one longer batch, it's really not a decisive issue. Okay, do all colleges give students something to look at before the interview in science subjects? I don't think the answer to that is yes. I think colleges do different things with interviews, and I think for us it's become a sort of a standard thing in most of the sciences to give you something to look at before the interview begins. I don't think all other colleges do that. I think some others do, but it's not a universal pattern across different colleges. We like it because it means that it gives you a chance to sort of calm down. You looked at a complex problem, you've had 5 minutes to think, oh my gosh, what am I going to be doing with this? Then you sort of think, okay, I can do a bit of that and I know a bit about that and I can see how that might work. It gives you a bit of a chance to sort of calm down and think it through in a productive way before the interview actually begins. And we like that. It gives you a chance to sort of start in the interview by explaining what you do know, what you can do with regard to this problem, or the ideas you've got with this problem before the actual. And you've actually had a chance to think about that and think it through before the interview begins. We're not that much interested in first impressions. Sometimes students think that they've got to say something remarkably clever at the start, and no, that's not how things work. Everybody's a bit flustered at the start of an interview. We're very used to that as interviewers. It's a chance to see how you develop over the course of the interview that matters to us. And so we find that works well if you've had something to look at beforehand and had a chance to think through your problem before the interview begins. We've got a question about open applications. Do applicants go to a common pool and then admissions officers place them in colleges that feel best for the students? The answer to that is no, that's not how it works. If you don't specify a college when you apply, if you just put in a so-called open application, you get randomly allocated to an individual college. So it's as if you'd apply to that college, and the college won't actually know if you put in an open application or a direct application. You get randomly assigned to a college, and from there you're treated just as if you'd applied to that college directly. So it's basically a randomizer is built into the process for open applicants in that respect. You're welcome to do so if you really don't mind which college you're at. I generally think, I would say this, I'm at a nice college, which I like a lot. I think generally it's good to look around the different colleges or the websites of the different colleges and produce a sort of a short list. Which of these colleges could you see yourself thinking, wanting to live at? And, that's like a big college or a small college, whether you want a college that's quite central or a college that's further out from the central town, whether you want a college with, that's got lots of green space, or a college that's much more compact, those sorts of things.
Yeah.
What was sort of relevant for you to making the college choice?
I think beyond the given sort of like grandeur of Trinity, how gorgeous it is, and sort of the alumni who've been here, I think for me it was also about the people. I really love the fact that there are such a large student body here at Trinity. I have close friends from all across the world doing all types of subjects with such interesting stories to tell and such insightful sort of perspectives that I don't think I necessarily would have had, say, at a different university or somewhere smaller. And for me, that was quite important. I consider myself to be quite extroverted. I love meeting different people and sort of getting to know different people. So for me, I really like that aspect as well.
Yeah. I think it's a very common experience of people at Trinity. They do, as I mentioned earlier on, I mean, we tend to have students who are curious about the world, about meeting other people, who like talking to other people. And I think that's a really nice part of what makes the college such a lively and influential place. There's a good range of people from around the world. So we've got a question about the percentage of international students at Trinity and Cambridge. At Trinity, we roughly 30% of our intake at undergraduate level are overseas students. They're students who have either got who either live abroad or not non-UK nationalities. So it's about 30% in 1 year. There are no quotas. It's not a target or anything like that, but it's just the case that we do get a very large number of applicants from overseas, and many of them are extremely worth taking very seriously. So we do get a significant number of students in that capacity. It's more than most other colleges. Most other colleges, it's more like 15 to 20%. I can't give you a percentage of undergraduates across the entire university who are overseas, I'm afraid. But at Trinity, at the moment, it is around 30%. We've got a question which I think is an interesting one to explore. What's the ideal applicant that Trinity College has in mind? And this is a difficult one because we deliberately try not to think in those terms. Specific traits. We're not really looking for specific traits. We like a diverse student body. We like students who've got different interests, even within the same subject. And so, I mean, to take a random example, in a subject like economics, we've got some students who are much more interested in the sort of microeconomics, sort of more mathematical side of economics. We've got some who are more interested in the history and governance of the economy, the institutions around which the economy is based. And we like having students with diverse interests within the same subject. We don't have sort of, certain numbers for each, but we do value different perspectives on the same subject. And I think that's one thing that keeps the group engaging, diverse, interested, coming at it from different perspectives. The students have often got things to teach each other as well over the course of their time here, ways of looking at the world and engaging with their subject, which they wouldn't have otherwise been exposed to. So we quite like that sense of breadth of the student body. As I've mentioned, it's a very diverse group of people just in terms of background. So, of course, the large international background. We have a very large number of students who've been to all sorts of different types of schooling systems, different socioeconomic backgrounds. So there's a good set of diversity in there. With qualifications also, we've got students who've taken all sorts of different qualifications. We have, obviously, most of our UK students have taken A-levels, some have taken IBs, but then our students overseas have taken a whole range of subjects from the Gaokao in China all the way through to advanced placement tests in the United States, and so a whole range of different qualifications. We have quite a bit of information about what grades we expect from different qualifications on the website, and it is useful to look at that if you're not taking A-levels. We've got a question about does applying to a more competitive college like Trinity affect the chance of getting off at Cambridge? The answer to that is no, and that's what the pooling system is for. So we have this inter-college pool that operates between your interviews and us telling you the results of your interviews in January, which is a quite sort of complex behind-the-scenes operation, where we all share the applicants we think deserve serious consideration of an offer with other colleges. And those other colleges then can bid for those students in the pool. So, and as I said earlier, around 100 people who've applied to Trinity get an offer from another college through this pooling system. And the result is you actually get a very sort of common proportion of applicants to any college getting an offer. It's not sort of an automatic quota-based system whereby every college admits a certain proportion of students to every college gets admitted by that college or another college. But it does work out quite well. We keep quite close track of the numbers. And it is the case that between 20 and 25% of applicants to most colleges get an offer from either from the college they apply to or another college. At Trinity, it's been slightly above that range. It's been 26 or 27% in the last few years, which in many recent years has been the most of any college, to which the proportion getting an offer from a college in Cambridge. But generally the differences are quite small. And so what I don't recommend you do is do what some people call playing the numbers game, trying to work out which colleges are least competitive and therefore apply to those. What you don't see if you do that is the number of students who get offers through the pool. And that often is a significant proportion of the students admitted to any one subject. So that's where just applying to the college that you think you'd like best to be a student at, or one of the range of colleges that you think is most appealing to you, is the better way to go, I think, rather than trying to select the one that you think has got the highest entry rate, because, as I say, that doesn't necessarily work out with the pooling system. Okay. We've got lots of questions coming in about the pool. I mean, we can talk about that a bit more. Quick question. The question is about, we'd be interviewed by another college as well, by Trinity, if you get selected from the pool. That's technically a possibility, but it very, very rarely happens. It only usually largely happens if there's been some sort of way in which the interviews you've had at Trinity have resulted in an unclear assessment. So, for example, you do very well in one interview and very poorly in another interview, and we think there's a mixed assessment here that's gone on. Those are the sorts of cases which often result in a re-interview by another college. But out of the 100 or so applicants taken who applied to Trinity from the pool, the number who have been re-interviewed out of that 100 is 2 or 3 a year. So the chances of being re-interviewed are tiny. And it's only really if there's something that's slightly sort of unusual about the experience you've gone through in that first round of interviews that really makes a difference. What are colleges looking for from personal statements? Can I throw that at you, Davido? You wrote a personal statement?
Yes. So I think the biggest emphasis that we were constantly reminded of when writing our personal statements is we want to try and give more of an academic perspective. So, of course, extracurriculars are so important in terms of just being a well-rounded, interesting individual. But in the context of your personal statement and admissions, I think Trinity and Cambridge in general really want to see sort of how are you stretching yourself academically. And that's usually through the form of supercurriculars. So supercurriculars are essentially academically related activities. So they could be, for example, extra reading, if you're doing courses in the summer, if you've gone to summer schools or entered essay competitions. So there are so many different, many of which are free as well, resources available online for you to kind of engage with. But the most important thing you do with these supercurriculars is then explain what you've taken from them and how that has kind of furthered you from an academic context. So, you know, it's all well and good saying, I've read this book, but you need to then say, what has that book then shedded further insight into? What have you taken from that book? How has that book kind of furthered your academic interest in the subject you want to study? So it's super important to be reflective and evaluative when you're reading resources or using kind of watching videos, whatever it may be. And kind of that's the way that we were told to sort of structure our personal statement.
It's very good advice, yeah. I mean, what we're looking to see is how you develop your interest in the subject that you apply for in a productive way. And there are differences between different subjects in that respect. I mean, how you would do a personal statement in, say, for example, maths is quite different from how you do it in, say, for example, English literature. In arts and humanities subjects, one thing just to be alert to is that we often use the personal statement as a basis for a discussion in part of your interview. So if you get to the interview and you're in an arts and humanities subject, usually we'll pick out a couple of points from your personal statement as a starting point for a further conversation. So you say you're interested in this and tell us how you got interested in it and tell us about how you'd see this particular issue, or tell us about, and so you've got to write about what you know about, what you'd like to talk about. Think about it as your way of setting an agenda for part of your interview, whereby you help us decide what we're going to talk to you further about, what you've got something to say about, what you've got something some way in which you can develop your broader knowledge and explain that in the context of an interview. Think about what you'd like to be discussing for 10 minutes with 2 people in that subject. And so for the arts and humanities subjects, you know, thinking about it from that perspective is often a very good way to think about what to include in a personal statement. We don't assess personal statements. We don't sort of mark them. We don't sort of give you we don't decide to interview you or not interview you based on your personal statement. It's really just a way, in arts and humanities subjects especially, of thinking about what to develop with you over the course of a discussion in part of one of your interviews. For sciences subjects, it's a bit different, and we do want to know often how you develop your thinking beyond just what you do in school. Obviously we know from your school reference a bit about what you do at school. We want to know how you develop those interests beyond just your school lessons in a personal statement. And we won't generally talk to you about it in science interviews in the same way that we would in our humanities interviews. But it is useful often for giving us a sense of you being somebody who's motivated to do well in your subject, motivated to learn more. And that matters. I mean, studying here in Cambridge, it does require a lot of, your own energy, your own effort to develop in your subject. And we want to have somebody who can do well, not just in class, but also who thinks about the subject and develops their thinking about the subject in other ways as well. So that's why the personal statement becomes a helpful part of giving us confidence that you're the sort of person who would remain motivated to carry on studying your subject beyond just the individual, the next essay you've got to write or the next worksheet you've got to fill in. It is important for us in that respect. Let's talk about so the question that's quite specific about directors of studies. So we talked a bit about this earlier about how directors of studies work, and in most subjects, your director of studies is the person in your subject who will both be leading an interview with you. Often one of the two interviews would be involving the director of studies, or it's just one interview will just be a director of studies in that subject. In many subjects, there are more than one director. There's more than one director of studies. So in many subjects like maths, there are I think Trinity is nine different directors of studies in maths. And so you'd start off with that director of studies in your first year, and throughout the 3 or 4 years, you'll agree to keep the same director of studies. But the person who's your director of studies in your first year will not be director of studies for the next year's first year. They will carry that set of students through the length of the degree programme. So the director of studies changes from year to year in larger subjects often. In some subjects, especially smaller subjects, there's often only just 1 or 2 directors of studies who share the responsibility between them. And occasionally, a director of studies is on leave, and we arrange a standing director of studies who both does the interviews and direct studies in that 1 year, but who wouldn't then necessarily carry on being director of studies for future years with that set of students. And that's just one of those things about the system in Cambridge that we all have to go off and do research sometimes as academics. We go off to different places or to different facilities, and we have our time to do our research. And so sometimes it's just one of those facts of academic life, which is a very helpful one for us in developing our research, but it's a fact that can be a bit disruptive from your side as students, that often somebody is not there for 1 term or 2 terms as part of in your degree program, and somebody else is standing in as a director of studies during that time, or doing the interviews, who then hands over back to the director of studies in that time. And that was actually the case with you.
Yeah, exactly.
This was the case with you. You had interviews with people who weren't going to be your director of studies, who were standing in for your director of studies. We don't think it's a major issue, and we do everything we can to ensure that there's much continuity as possible over the course of your time here. Generally, students don't really see this as a major problem in their time. Is that fair?
Absolutely. I still feel very well supported, so no, it wasn't too much of an issue for me.
Question about the natural sciences pre-interview test. Okay, so we've got on the website a pre-interview question sheet, which includes questions from physics, chemistry, maths, and biology. And the question we've just had in is whether you're expected to answer all of them. And the answer is no. we ask you to take questions in at least 2 of those different sections. So you'll often do the maths test, and you'll do the physics questions, that sort of type of thing. We will just do the biology questions with the separate maths questions as well. Generally, we don't expect you to know about A-level subjects that you haven't taken yourself. And we organise the interviews around that. So if you're applying for natural sciences, we'll ask you which particular sciences, well, we'll know which A-levels you're doing, but we'll often ask you as well, which particular science are you thinking of focusing on during your time at Cambridge? And we'll generally have at least one of the interviewers in that subject. that you've applied for. We won't put you with somebody in a subject that you haven't studied before. In subjects that are fairly diverse, like natural sciences, it's really important for us to ensure that everybody's treated fairly and that you have an interviewer who actually can understand where you want to go with the subject well and can evaluate your ability to progress with that subject. So both in terms of the pre-interview questions and in the choice of interviewers, it's steered towards what you've studied and what you want to go on to study during your time in Cambridge. I think that answers the question there. There is a little blurb at the start of the pre-interview question sheet which explains that, but that's the broad system that we have here. Question on the GCSE results has come in a few moments ago. I'm going to try and run through a couple more quickly. But question on GCSE results. So what we're looking for is confidence that you'll be able to get A-level results that are in the right sort of range. So you're going to get A-star AA if you're an arts and humanities applicant, or an A-star A if you're a maths and sciences applicant. And GCSEs are one among many different indicators of your likelihood of going on to get those results. So if you're getting 8s and 9s at GCSE and you're going on in that subject to A-level, carrying on with that subject to A-level, and that's a good basis for us to think, okay, so they're getting 8s and 9s at GCSE, therefore they're likely to go on to get an A or an A-star in that subject at A-level. It's a good basis, but there are other ways to show that. And often school references make comments about how they've done mock exams with the student and they're getting A or A-star in those mock exams. So it's one indicator. GCSEs provide one indicator among a few possible indicators of the likelihood of going on to get A's and A-stars at A-level. What we're most interested, of course, is the subjects that you're going to do at A-level. So we're not really interested in your GCSE marks and subjects that are not relevant to your A-levels or your degree. So it's often the case that students who are applying for science subjects here have not got great GCSEs in arts and humanities subjects and vice versa. And that really isn't an issue for us. We don't count the numbers of 8s or 9s you've got at GCSE. That's not how we do things. What we're looking for is evidence that you're going on to get the A-level grade that you need for entry here. And if you're not getting that from your GCSEs, then we want to see other sort of evidence that will give us that confidence. We have a question about student life, and I hand this one over to Davinder.
Of course.
So transition from living at Cambridge to being at home.
Yeah. I think every student agrees that it can be a bit daunting at first. You've got all these thoughts. Will I make friends? How will I adjust to not seeing my parents maybe, or family members after being at home for so long? But I think what I loved most about my first week at Trinity was how involved other students were in making you feel welcome. So your very first few days, you probably have a lot of interaction with the Trinity College Student Union. And those are just different members here at Trinity who are here to help you settle in really well through a bunch of activities, taking you to your rooms, just having chats with you. And I think that at the very start just eased my nerves, because I was like, do you know what? This is a lovely community. I think I'll probably find my crowd here. And then it was sort of the immediate settling in, getting to kind of knock on each other's doors and say hello, people leaving their doors open as kind of like an invite for you to come in and say hi. I think the first week, living in close quarters, particularly in my first year in Waterton Building, which is a freshers only accommodation building, so for first years only, that really allowed me to kind of naturally and organically foster those relationships between people. And then, of course, when you start your lectures, just by going to lectures, sitting in supervisions with people, you naturally start to form those friendships too. And, this pace kind of differs for different people. I would say, even though I considered myself to be quite extroverted, particularly in my subject, it took more, a few more weeks than maybe I would have liked to start making close friendships. But, that didn't matter in the end. I sort of have those friends. I had my friends in college. I was making friends in different colleges. And it sort of became like a second home for me. So I think the transition, it was daunting for me at first. It usually is for most people, but you slowly start to kind of find your place and find your home within your college. And that was certainly the case for me here at Trinity.
We've got only a minute left. I'm trying to answer 3 questions very quickly. One is, does a gap year affect does applying with a gap year in mind affect your chances of entry? The answer is no. We very much see that as your choice. We don't sort of make a decision based on whether you're going to apply for next year or the year after. We think you're best placed to judge whether to take a gap year or not between school and university. and it doesn't affect you in any other way in your application. 4 A-levels or 3 A-levels. 3 A-levels is fine almost always. The only exception is further maths. So if you're taking maths, further maths, and you're applying for, say, a subject like natural sciences, we want you to take 2 other science subjects as well. So, so with that one exception, further maths, there's no advantage in taking 4 A-levels. We only make offers based on 3 A-levels here at Trinity. And then finally, a question about living out or living in. Students, of course, are not obliged to live in college. They can live out of college if they so choose. And every year we have 1 or 2 students who do so. And that's really, again, your choice. However, there are certain advantages to living in college in that, firstly, it's a social environment. You get to meet other people. You get to enjoy life in college. You get to enjoy the facilities we have to offer. And also, it's a nice place. As Rizzo was saying earlier, the rooms are nice. It's fairly cheap. It's a good place to be. So I hope that also factors into your calculations about whether to live in or live out if you do become a student in Trinity. We've got to wind it up. Thank you all so much for your time. Thank you for staying with us if you've been with us since the start. Please do feel free to email us further questions. You've got individual questions you'd like us to answer. And if you do go on to put an application in, I look forward to meeting some of you in October 2026.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.